So anyway, we're going to talk about the importance of safety in workplace. So when you are doing projects, managing projects for your clients, or working on client sites or work sites or whatever, you know, what is the importance of safety? What kind of mindset you might come across, and how to get yourself proactively equipped with proper proper knowledge, information, and perspective to be able to counter some of the resistance you see to safety best practices. So we'll cover that up here, and then we'll get into identification, quantification, and mitigation of safety risks. So, you know, safety, when you see something unsafe, you don't just call it unsafe, either verbally or in writing, in email, whatever, and just declare it unsafe. You know, that's too subjective. There are ways to quantify the risk associated with the unsafe practice, unsafe behavior, unsafe you know, condition or whatever, and we'll cover that, and that's part of what we call safety risk assessment. And that method is not uniquely ours that we're going to share with you today, but it is, you'll see that it actually permeates many codes, including including NFPA 70E, that when we actually show, when we do that 8-hour NFPA 70E arc flash 2018 program, that we just debuted our 2018 NFPA 70E arc flash program this year, and we've run it once this year already. Have several other opportunities coming up, or multiple other opportunities coming up for arc flash. But anyway, in that program, we show you some of the annexes to that part of NFPA 70E code, where they show you a full-blown safety risk assessment program. So if any of you have access to that, you can look it up in one of the annexes and see exactly. It's a lot more detailed than what I'm going to cover with you today, because we cover so many different things. We are not able to get too deep into one particular area. We'll talk about elevated work, and elevated work is everywhere. Whether you're talking about a project that you may be an engineer on, or managing a project as an engineer, or if you're an engineer providing your services in a industrial plant or processing plant or manufacturing facility of any type, doesn't matter. Elevated work is everywhere, and we need to, you know, we're going to share with you a checklist of things that you need to make sure that are met. Those conditions and best practices are considered when you or your folks, or your workers, your employees, and your you know, anybody assigned to your project when they're performing elevated work. We'll get into PPE now. PPE is such a kind of a banal kind of a term today that you know, anything and everything could get potentially lumped in there that's associated with workplace. But we're going to talk about some. While some of the PPE that we're going to talk about is very common, and you might say, hey, you know, I don't need to know anything about that PPE. You know, everybody, this is just too commonplace. And but we will still talk about some best practice associated with how to use that PPE properly. You know, even something as simple as safety glasses. You know, if you're out there in workplace, you are going to see some folks basically bend the rules, so to speak, meaning not wear the safety glasses the way they're supposed to be worn up against your, you know, the eye socket of your eyes, and not hanging on your nose. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll get into a little bit of arc flash safety, which I mentioned earlier is NFPA 70E. If we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that briefly in a engineering safety type of program that we're doing today, and so we'll touch on that a little bit, heighten your awareness a little bit. But if you want to learn more about it, you don't have to be a double E to basically benefit from NFPA 70E arc flash program. That's how we kind of vulgate it, start from the basics and put it very plainly, so that really, if you're not a double E, or even if you're not an engineer, we have folks that then are not engineers, you'll have a substantial takeaway from that program. But here we're going to just give you a brief overview of Arc Flash, some of the basic fundamental tips associated with Arc Flash related to safety. We'll get into environmental health and safety, otherwise known as EHS, and in there basically you'll see topics such as air quality covered, and a few other things. So we'll talk about that when we get in there. Safety sensors and controls. This is a little bit of electronics and electricity, electrical discussion included in this program. Why? Because as you walk around typical manufacturing facilities, industrial plants, processing plants, even large commercial facilities, distribution centers, like Walmart distribution centers, UPS, hubs and so forth, they all have safety sensors and controls, and proper use of them, some minimal familiarization with their function and what they do and how they work is important. So we'll touch on that briefly and share some of those, show you what those sensors and controls look like. Then we'll get into fire. Again, no safety program will be complete without discussion of the causes of fire, classifications of fire, and the types of fire extinguishers that are prescribed for the different types of fires. We'll get into spill prevention, control, and countermeasures, and that could be. I think one of you mentioned that you're into. You basically design or install above ground tanks. So that's where I mentioned that above ground tanks, if it's liquid or anything really, liquid or non-liquid, any kind of fluid. Can potentially escape from tanks, and so that's and while you may be dealing with large above ground tanks, storage of fluids can be in any different in a number of different types of ways, above ground, underground, and so forth, silos included. So we'll touch a little bit on SPCC. Let me look at let's see here. Yep. I see Simon has raised his hand. So hand raising feature is there for you gentlemen who've not used it before. But so Simon, let's see here. Have not received the slides. Richard, well, let me just ask everybody. Did you? All right. Walter did not receive it either. Have not received. Okay. Richard has not received it. Walter has not. Anybody received the slides? Let's see here. I thought I got a confirmation from Simon that he received them, and they were sent out a while, at least a week ago. Simon, can you confirm that you received them? I know you and I exchanged some emails. You initially had difficulty receiving them or whatever, didn't receive them. Okay, so Simon did receive them. No problem. We'll try to send them out again. And just to serve as a reminder, if those of you who didn't receive them, if you could just send Victoria or myself an email saying that hey, you didn't receive them, that way we'll be sure to respond to that particular email. What happens is we're provided certain emails by attendees, and sometimes we'll send the handouts and the evaluation forms to that particular email, and sometimes it'll end up into the spam box and gets lost. So when you send us an email saying that you did not receive it, then we will send that information to that exact email this time as a response to your email, which has a better chance of making it through when we're responding to an email from you. That's my understanding. It seems to work well. So send us an email. We'll be sure to respond to it and make sure you get the handouts. And also that way, when we finish up the program and get the evaluations from you, that way we'll have the exact right email address, and we'll send the certificates to that email as well. Okay, all right. So let's see here. Hazardous waste. We're going to talk about RCRA, an act passed by the Congress where it was where hazardous waste has to be handled in a proper way. We'll cover all of those best practices and what that act includes, and how certain materials can be basically flagged as hazardous waste, and what are some of that criteria that is that designates something as hazardous waste. And you'll be surprised to see that a substance doesn't have to be ostensibly hazardous to be declared hazardous. If you've got an unknown substance stored in a drum other than H2O, and if you're not even sure that it's pure H2O, if you're not sure about anything stored in a drum, it's totally anonymous and unknown, you have to declare it hazardous waste. So unless and until it is tested and proven otherwise. So we'll cover more of that later on. Emergency action plans, you all have seen these little maps posted, charts or maps posted on walls as you enter the various facilities, industrial, commercial setting, institutional buildings, hospitals, even large malls and so forth, and that's all part of emergency action plan. Lockout tagout, very important component of in workplace, very important set of best practices and rules, and part of policy, safety policies in facilities, pretty much every facility, where you have pieces of equipment that have to be worked on or maintained, and lockout tagout procedures spell out how to properly secure and turn off and secure and de-energize equipment before you let human beings work on them, to make sure that they're fully safe and will not cause any issues. And then we'll talk about ergonomics, and I'm not sure if any of you have been exposed to ergonomics. When I was in the corporate world, one of the programs I managed at the corporate level was basically ergonomics, and it was kind of dovetailed with automation. So, and that's how I got involved in it. I did some automation engineering for many years, and that's how I got into ergonomics program management. But so we'll enlighten you a little bit on what ergonomics is. Workforce in the United States is, getting older and older. The age is increasing and rising. When I was in the corporate world during my last couple of years in the corporate world, I served in various facilities in the U.S. and overseas, provided my services to various facilities as program manager. And as I went around and I noticed the demographics in maintenance and really in production even, I know it was kind of obvious that the mean age in maintenance and even in production was in the 50s, mid 50s, which basically is the age where injuries take longer to heal, and chronic injuries beginning to percolate up and begin to cause issues, and which can result in workman's comp type of claims, which can result in, of course, injury in workplace and absence from work, and so on. And of course, not to mention the medical remediation expense. And if and when I was in the corporate world, most of the facilities I